To the program, we begin with the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. After 24 years of Bashar al-Assad's rule and 13 years after the Syrian revolution, opposition forces have taken control of the country. Assad and his family are now in Moscow, where they've been granted asylum. An overnight curfew has been imposed in Damascus. Hamza Salut begins our coverage.
A new era for Syria. After more than 50 years of the Assad's family rule, opposition fighters have taken control of the country. And the man behind it all, the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Ahmad al-Shari', also known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, emerged victorious. But while speaking at the historic Amawi Mosque in the old city of Damascus, he said the real victory is for all Syrians.
Today, Syria is cleansed. It rid itself of this vile regime. This victory was not at a low price. It is the result of the sacrifice of the fallen martyrs. This regime has imprisoned thousands of its own citizens unjustly and without any crime. We are the rightful owners of this land, and today we are rewarded with this victory.
On the streets of Damascus, celebrations seen and heard across the capital, along with the release of prisoners. After years of detention under Assad, they now walk free. And people swarmed the presidential palace in western Damascus, an image that was unthinkable just a few days ago. After taking over state television, opposition forces had this message for the Syrian people.
The city of Damascus has been liberated. The tyrant Bashar al-Assad has been toppled. All the prisoners have been released from the prison of Damascus. We wish that all our fighters and citizens preserve and maintain the property of the state of Syria. Long live Syria.
On Sunday, Syria's prime minister addressed the nation from his home, urging the opposition to ensure an orderly transition.
We're extending our hands even to the opposition, who already reached out to us and gave us assurances they will not cause any harm to any citizen who belongs to this Syria of ours.
Despite the historic series of events, the world is now left wondering, what's next for the Syrian people? Hamza Salut, Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera's Rasul Sada is in Damascus, where he gained access to the presidential palace.
We are at the presidential palace in Damascus, where Assad family has ruled over Syria for decades. This is the protocol gate of the palace. So Assad family has been receiving their VIP guests, the state dignitaries, through this gate. And now this palace, after President Bashar Assad of Syria leaving the country and going to Moscow, and after the opposition fighters taking over the capital, they have rushed into this palace, and now it is fully under their control. I was just in the protocol hall, but for the whole region, indeed, when you are coming to Damascus, you're feeling that this is a historic moment. You've seen that Syrians are now living in a different reality. There is no Bashar al-Assad, there is no Hafiz al-Assad, there is no Assad family who has ruled over Syria for 54 years, but rather the opposition fighters coming from all across the country. Rasul Sardar, Al Jazeera, Damascus.
Well, Bashar al-Assad and his family are now in Moscow. Yulia Shapovalova has more from there on Russia's involvement in Assad's movements.
Ousted Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and his family members have arrived in Moscow as the Russian authorities have granted them political asylum. Assad was allegedly evacuated by a Russian plane from a Russian airbase in Latakia. The Syrian opposition has reportedly guaranteed the security of Russian military bases in Latakia and Tartus, as well as diplomatic missions in the country. So while the opposition in Syria is forming a transitional authority, Russia's requested emergency consultations with the UN Security Council on the situation in Syria, which could take place on Monday, December the 9th, as the Russian authorities consider it necessary to resume negotiations on a settlement in Syria under the UN supervision. Now, a flag has been removed from the Syrian embassy in Moscow. And Russia has urged all parties to manage the peaceful transition of power using political means. During Assad's rule, Syria was Russia's strongest ally in the Middle East. Bashar al-Assad allowed Russia to have a naval base in Tartus and air base in Khmeimim near Latakia in exchange for Russia's political and military support. Allegedly, Moscow used its naval base in Tartus for transferring its mercenaries to Africa's Sudan, Mali and Central African Republic. According to the statement by the Foreign Ministry, the military personnel at the Russian bases in Syria are on high alert, but there is no serious threat to their safety and there is no panic at the bases either. Yulia Shapovalova, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
The United States has hailed the fall of President Bashar al-Assad's regime and called for him to be held accountable. President Joe Biden says Washington will work with Syrian groups to establish a transition, but warned of possible risks ahead.
At long last, the Assad regime has fallen. This regime brutalized and tortured and killed literally hundreds of thousands of innocent Syrians. The fall of the regime is a fundamental act of justice. It's a moment of historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria to build a better future for their proud country. It's also a moment of risk and uncertainty. As we all turn to the question of what comes next, the United States will work with our partners and the stakeholders in Syria to help them seize an opportunity to manage the risks.
Meanwhile, American military forces have carried out airstrikes on Islamic State targets in Syria. U.S. Central Command says it hit dozens of ISIL targets, including camps and operatives. General Michael Kurilla warned that the country will continue its mission to defeat the group and stop it from taking advantage of the current situation. Heidi Jo Castro has more from Washington, D.C.
President Joe Biden addressed the situation from the White House, saying that this was a moment of both opportunity and risk in Syria. He said that the U.S. is heartened that opposition leaders are saying the right words at this moment, promising a future government that is inclusive, that is perhaps even moderate. However, the U.S. will be watching to see if those words turn into action. And Biden saying that if this is a peaceful transfer of power led by the Syrian people, eventually the U.S. could pledge humanitarian aid to rebuild the country. But of course, this is all taken with a grain of salt because Biden is leaving office in just over a month's time. And incoming president-elect Donald Trump has said that he wants the U.S. to be hands off of Syria. But in the meantime, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken promising that the U.S. would stand in support of the Syrian people, saying that they finally have a reason for hope. Meanwhile, as we're hearing these words of encouragement, we're also seeing acts of military strength from the U.S. Of course, there are 900 U.S. troops stationed in Syria. And on the same day that Assad fled the country, the U.S. Air Force launched targeted airstrikes against 75 targets linked to ISIL. This is according to a statement from U.S. Central Command. These were ISIL camps and operatives with damage assessments underway. No reports of civilian casualties involved. And the timing of these strikes on the same day that Assad fell cannot be more stark, with the message directly given as a warning to the new potential leaders of Syria, coming as a statement from the CENTCOM commander Michael Kurilla, saying all organizations in Syria should know that we, the U.S., will hold them accountable if they partner or support ISIL in any way. Maintaining ISIL and containing its influence is a top priority for the U.S. Reporting from Washington, Heidi Jo Castro, Al Jazeera.
Now, during Bashar al-Assad's rule, tens of thousands of people who opposed the government were imprisoned. Some forcibly disappeared. At the notorious Sednaya prison in Damascus, many were taken to underground cells known as the Red Wing. People have been digging by flashlight in order to free inmates held underground. Specialized teams from the White Helmets organization have now arrived there in search of detainees who might be held in hidden cellars. These were the scenes at the prison as inmates were allowed to walk free. Prisoners emerged from overcrowded cells, some in shock after years of imprisonment. Axel Zemovich reports.
They run as free men for the first time in years, escaping the confines of Syria's prisons. Across Syria, scenes of liberation as thousands emerge from detention centers, leaving facilities that have been described as human slaughterhouses under Assad's decades-long rule that many activists have called a kingdom of silence. They are among thousands of individuals